with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about this De'Aaron Fox debacle, I guess you could say. So De'Aaron Fox, a lot of the Kings apparently knew that De'Aaron Fox was going to. It was unlikely that De'Aaron Fox was going to sign this extension for this offseason. All the way back in June, The Athletic actually reported that Fox wanted to see how the Kings manage their roster over the summer before making a commitment to the Kings. And I mean, I feel like they've managed their roster, decently. They did acquire DeMar DeRozan, but again, I don't really think DeMar DeRozan brings that much of an impact and changes much with the Kings. I feel like the team, having De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis already, those two guys tend to be much more dominant inside the arc than they are from outside of the arc. And relying on Sabonis primarily relies heavily on the mid-range shot. And while I don't think it's a bad shot necessarily, it is, however, an inefficient shot and something that teams try to stem away from now, given how the game is played, and they try to go for three-pointers a little bit more as opposed to mid-ranges. This is why the era in the 2010s, a lot of people and a lot of players decided to take a bunch of mid-ranges and things like that. But the game sort of evolved, and one could make the argument that it started with Steph, but the reality is that it started with the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs, when they had the Spurs dynasty, they had a lot of corner three-point shooters, and they were utilizing the three-point shot a little bit more than your average NBA team at the time. And then came Steph Curry, where a bunch of teams eventually started to catch on to the strategy and were like, man, we should start shooting a little bit more threes. And that's why everybody is shooting more threes now. And so having DeMar DeRozan does not improve your three-point shooting in the slightest. And I feel like three-point shooting is something that you need. It's definitely a much better shot to take as opposed to a mid-range shot, because when you take a mid-range, obviously, it's still the exact same amount of points as a layup, but you're just farther from the basket. And it's like a high risk, low reward, kind of shot compared to the three-point shot, where it's a high risk, high reward kind of shot, which is why a bunch of teams sort of deviated from that. So aside from, the roster construction, again, I said it was rather decent that they acquired DeMar. Decent, but that doesn't mean it was great or fantastic or completely changes the identity of the Kings, in my opinion. And on Monday, Shams actually confirmed that Fox's plan was not to sign an extension, though the roster had little to do with it, according to Shams. And he reported that Fox has been engaged with the Kings over the past few years and was involved in the decision to add DeMar DeRozan. And the motivations for Fox were reportedly more financial. He was eligible to add $165 million and 3 years to his current rookie max contract this offseason by waiting a year. He opens at least one more lucrative door, or even perhaps two, at least according to this article. No matter what, Fox is going to be eligible for a $229 million extension next offseason. By waiting this extra season, he becomes eligible to get that extra year because he'd have one fewer year left on his existing contract. So the reason why he did not take this contract was because he's waiting to get a little bit more money from the Kings. So Kings fans should not really be worried about it all too much. And I will say, however, this move is most likely going to put them a little bit closer to the second apron or even the first apron if they're not careful, which is another reason why Jalen Brunson actually took a pay cut, which was very surprising from Brunson, trying to keep the roster together and trying to keep the team in contention. So I guess there might be some Kings fans that are questioning, why doesn't De'Aaron Fox take the pay cut? But obviously, De'Aaron Fox, he wants that dough, and he's got a good enough team to be able to not only make the dough, but also possibly increase their chances of winning. So I don't really see a problem with this. I don't see a problem with athletes trying to chase the money. This is half of the reason why they play for the most part. And so again, waiting this extra season is just going to, remove a year from his contract and thus make him eligible for a $229 million extension. And as NBA contracts can include some raises, which is another thing, like raises of up to 8%, the final year of that possible extension would be the most of all of the deals that he could possibly get. And an older player risking decline might prefer to sign the contract, the $165 million contract right away from like just for security reasons. But remember that De'Aaron Fox is still only 26 years old and arguably in his prime right now. So his value is going to likely carry over at least one more year and probably a little bit more than that. And assuming that he doesn't suffer any big injuries that affect his legs. So he can feel relatively safe in waiting to secure the contract and waiting to get all of that money from the Kings. But if Fox is not underrated this season, because in my opinion, De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis are the two most underrated players in the NBA right now. The fact that they did not one of them got selected for an all-star team is just ridiculous in my opinion. But he could probably be worth more than the $229 million, assuming he does not get underrated like he did last season, or if he plays significantly better than he did last season. If he makes an All-NBA or wins Defensive Player of the Year or MVP, but it's going to be unlikely for both of those in my opinion, he'll be eligible for a Supermax extension. So that's really I think that's really what he's going to be going for. Winning a Defensive Player of the Year, like for De'Aaron Fox, it's not necessarily a, how should I say this? A favorite. Like, I don't expect De'Aaron Fox to win the Defensive Player of the Year. I think Victor is going to easily win the Defensive Player of the Year award this year. But MVP, depending on where the Sacramento Kings stand, if they're a high seed in the Western Conference, there is a very solid story behind De'Aaron Fox being the MVP of the league because, they would have completely, if his production increases and as a result of his production increasing, the Kings are able to win more games, then that just means that, De'Aaron Fox's production is bringing the value that the team needs and therefore would give him a good story for winning the MVP. Granted, that is still rather unlikely compared to some other players that are now favorites for winning the MVP, Jokic. But aside from that, or even SGA, who plays his position, he's going to have to vastly outplay SGA if he's going to want to get consideration for the MVP, which is a very difficult task. SGA is fantastic. One of the best mid-range scorers at the point guard position. His mid-range game is filthy. It is absolutely filthy. And again, as I said, this would allow him to add 5 new seasons to his existing contract next summer and guarantee him a ridiculous $345 million if he were to win the MVP. That is a lot of money. That is way more money than what Jason Tatum is going to be making and what several other NBA players are also going to be making. And it would be the biggest contract in NBA history for now, obviously, because, a lot of players are going to want to make more than him and they're going to pressure their team into making more than him. And though given the league's current economic climate, that record is likely to be broken pretty much every year for the foreseeable future. This has been a trend ever since teams have been signing supermaxes. Jaylen Brown, he signed the biggest contract in NBA history at $304 million at one point, and then Jason Tatum went ahead and signed the biggest contract. Next it's probably going to be Steph Curry. Next it could be anyone really. The money and the amount of money that the NBA teams are making is just ridiculous, and I wouldn't be surprised if this $345 million extension ends up getting broken, but first it has to happen, obviously, so we have no idea if that's even going to happen. So the potential to become the highest paid player in NBA history is obviously going to be appealing for De'Aaron Fox, and in Fox's case, the patience does have the secondary benefit of allowing this season to play out. And the Kings expect to be a playoff team this season, but DeRozan is 35 years old. And the Kings got knocked out of the play-in tournament last season. So while finances are an obvious reason for De'Aaron Fox to wait on an extension, it never hurts to keep your options open just in case the Kings don't pan out the way that the Kings should pan out. And they made sorry for that. The Kings, they made the playoffs just once in the last 18 seasons, and that one season was ultimately cut short because Steph Curry said, I can hit threes, and had 52 points. And Fox, he's already one of the more well-paid point guards, and he's going to make a lot more in the very near future, assuming that his play could continue and he doesn't suffer any injuries. So waiting one more year, it's not going to be the death sentence for the Kings. Really, the way I see it, just focus on this season, focus on how the season plays out, depending on how it plays out. If it plays out good, then you have no worries for De'Aaron Fox. If it plays out bad, then that's when you should worry about De'Aaron Fox. So that's all that I really have on this second segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the third segment where I talk about the Lakers, and they're finally going to try to make a trade. They're finally going to make a move. It seems like it. So I'm going to talk about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.